Hello and welcome back to Histories Tech, and today we are continuing our look at the Armored Personnel Carrier or Armored Personnel Vehicle by looking at a very niche subcategory of it, the Amphibious Armored Personnel Vehicle. Now, I have talked about amphibious tanks in the past, and we're not discussing that. We're discussing very distinctly APC's Armored Personnel Carriers that have been used or designed strictly for amphibious purposes. Now, like the APC, its origins can be traced back to World War I into World War II when the APC starts to really see its popularity. However, it also is connected to this vehicle right here, the LVT. Now, the LVT was an amphibious vehicle that wasn't necessarily designed just to transport personnel, but also equipment. It was designed to move in anything necessary from landing ships and bring them onto the shoreline during World War II. And by the end of World War II, they had basically been converted into amphibious tanks. I am going to exclude certain vehicles, such as the Soviet BMP, which originally had been designed as an amphibious APC. However, most of the amphibious components were removed, and while it can float, it wasn't specifically designed to be amphibious anymore. And we're also going to include the American M113, which in its prototype phase was completely designed to be an amphibious vehicle, which is one of the reasons they went with the aluminum body on it. And it did see some amphibious action being converted into an amphibious vehicle during the Vietnam War, but that was really not its original full intended purpose. When we really get into purpose-built amphibious APCs, we've got to talk about the M59. Now, unlike the M113 that replaced the M59, this vehicle was initially designed with the idea in mind that it should be amphibious from the start. And while they were only produced for about 6 years, they kind of started this trend on making these vehicles that were specifically designed for amphibious capabilities. Now, roughly at the exact same time the M59 is being developed, the Soviet Union is going to develop their BTR-50. However, their model is basically a PT-76 light tank that had been converted into an armored personnel carrier. And this is actually going to become a very common trend with the Soviet Union, in which they take a IFV or a light tank and they convert it to fully amphibious capabilities. And we're going to see this with like the BT-60, 70, 80, and 94. And because of this, the Soviets are going to create probably the widest variety of amphibious armored personnel carriers. And every one of their affiliate nations is going to start making authorized copies and modifications. And we're actually going to see this going into modern day, that we still see these vehicles such as the BTRs and the MTLB series are still being used and modified to this day. And after the M59, the United States is going to make a big leap with their amphibious armored personnel carriers, and they're going to develop what's known as the LVT-P5. Now, this absolutely massive vehicle will become the mainstay for amphibious warfare for not only the United States, but also for the Philippines, Chile, Taiwan, and the South Vietnamese military. It would be introduced in 1956, only 2 years after the M59, and actually is still in service to this day with the Republic of China's Marine Corps. Now, this was followed by an attempt by the United States to actually scale down the LVT-P5 into a much smaller, more compact size using the M59's design, and they actually developed what was known as the LVT-6. However, this vehicle was problematic, and only a handful were even built before the whole project was abandoned. However, a much more successful design came in the form of the LVT-P7, also known as the AAV-P7, the Amphibious Assault Vehicle. Some people even refer to them as the Amtrak. Now, this vehicle, which has been the mainstay of the United States Marine Corps since 1972, is actually employed with nations around the world, including countries such as Italy, Japan, the Philippines, Spain, and South Korea. It employs 3 main variants. One for personnel use, one as a command vehicle, and one as a recovery vehicle, similar to the recovery vehicles we've talked about in the past. But sadly, with every vehicle I've talked about, they were all designed before the 1980s and even before the end of the Cold War. And so since the late 90s into the early 2000s, there's actually been this huge surge to produce new generation amphibious APCs. The Russians have actually been working on their VPK 7829 Boomerang, which, similar to their BTR series, is going off of an IFV and making an amphibious. The Chinese are actually going two different directions with their own development. One is similar to the Russians, utilizing an IFV and converting it to amphibious capabilities. The other is basically going kind of the route of the old LVTs and creating a tracked vehicle that has heavy response capabilities. As for the United States, they've been kind of having some issues replacing the AAV. Now, the first concept that kind of really went through some serious work was known as the Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle, the EFV. And this vehicle was problematic from the beginning. Tons of cost overruns, production delays, development delays, even doctrine changes, which basically eliminated the need for the vehicle, went through. And by 2011, the project was canceled. But there was still a need for the United States Marine Corps to replace its aging fleet of AAVs, which you got to remember, the Marine Corps has been using this for 52 years. So in 2018, BAE Systems teamed up with the Italian company Iveco, utilizing their Super AV to develop something known as the Amphibious Combat Vehicle. Now, the plan for this is that the Amphibious Combat Vehicle will actually become part of a series of vehicles, a family of vehicles like we've seen with like the Bradley Fighting Vehicle and the M113's multiple variants. And this will hopefully return the Marine Corps' edge that they lost when the very controversial idea to remove tanks from the United States Marine Corps happened recently, and allow any country who buys into it to have a plethora and a multiple option of vehicle variants off of one platform. But there you have it, a quick look at the Amphibious Armored Personnel Carrier or vehicle, a rather interesting niche that really only affects certain departments of militaries. And while this is something that could have easily gone away, we're seeing an exponential growth in the development of these vehicles. And with the more recent conflicts that take place on coastal areas like we've seen with the war in Ukraine and hostilities that have started to occur in places like the Pacific Ocean, the need for amphibious vehicles that can not only transport personnel, but provide direct fire support is growing. It's very likely that we're going to start seeing even newer variants of these vehicles, anti-tank, anti-aircraft, anti-ship versions of these vehicles, likely to appear in the next 20, 30 years. But that's it for today. I thank you for joining me. I look forward to talking to you on the next time.